folks. Thanks for tuning in. This week we've got chapters 27 and 28. David gets his revenge on the hospital. Chapter 27. David took the boat straight across to Galveston this time. Since the boat wasn't laden down with gold, the trip took no time compared to the previous one. David was still amazed at the ease in which he could travel between the two countries. No one stopped him or asked for any passports or paperwork. Although David was prepared for this, having his fake ID, driver's license, and passport at the ready, David pulled up to the private dock he had originally left from, tied the boat off, and walked up to Martin's house. David knocked on the door, and to his surprise, Martin answered. "I thought you would have sold the house by now." "No, not in this economy," Martin replied. "Do you mind if I tie the boat up to your dock for a while?" "Is there anything in it I should be aware of?" Martin asked suspiciously. David smiled, recalling the look on Martin's face the day the workers had been loading the boat with the crates of gold. "No, it's completely empty. You can look for yourself if you like." "No, that's all right. But if any law officers show up asking questions, I'll deny any knowledge of it, or you for that matter." "Sounds fair to me." David called a taxi and had it drop him off at a car rental company. Using a fake driver's license, he rented a car and headed to Dallas. The next day, he met Don at the agreed-upon location in the park. They chose a secluded picnic table and sat down. "What is this job going to entail?" Don asked. "Well, to put it in a nutshell, you're looking at kidnapping and some light torture," David said. Don looked closely at David to see if he was kidding. David didn't even blink. When Don decided that David was serious, he got a little more professional. "How many people are we kidnapping?" 8, David replied. "For that many, I will need to hire some helpers, and the price will go up." "That's understandable. Can you trust these men?" "Yes. We were all in the same squad in the Army. We have saved each other's lives on several occasions." David gave Don the list that Paul West had given him. "These men will be at this resort in Flagstaff this weekend. I will be at this address waiting. Is there anything else you need at this time?" "A deposit would seal the deal," Don said. David reached into his duffel bag and laid one of the gold bars on the table. "That will do nicely," Don said. David exchanged the rental car for a pickup and drove to Flagstaff. He retrieved the packages from the package store and drove to the house. It was a large house with a basement. This will work great, David thought as he unpacked the equipment and started getting things ready for the party. The next night he got a text from Don. It read, "The party's on." An hour later a cargo van pulled up to the house. David put on a ski mask and went out to greet them. Don and his 2 helpers were already wearing ski masks. "Did you get them all?" "Everyone that was on your list." David opened the back of the van to find the men blindfolded with their hands and feet tied. They were still groggy from the chloroform. They moved the men inside the house and tied each one into a chair. "Did you have to get rough with any of them?" "No, not yet." "Okay, when we do this, don't mark any of their faces, because they're going to be making a video confession. That way there can be no mistake or denial of who is saying what." "Which one do you think will be the most stubborn?" David asked Don. "Probably the senator or the administrator. They have the most to lose." David waited until the men were fully conscious. Then, one by one, they were dragged into another room. Their blindfolds were removed, and they were given the option to confess to their crimes or suffer the consequences. David started with the lowest of the rank and file. The first 2 confessed immediately, but as they moved up the ladder, a few required a little working over. In the end, they too confessed. However, the senator and the administrator would not be so easily swayed. Okay, then. Let's take these two down to the basement, David told Don. The men were dragged down the stairs, still tied to the chairs. They had their blindfolds reapplied. Let's start with you, David said, leaning close to the administrator. Cut off his clothes, David told Don's helpers. The two men produced knives that would have scared most people and began slicing the administrator's clothing. In a few minutes he was completely naked. David then walked up and tied the administrator's head to the chair so he could not move it. David placed a small ice chest under the chair. David then removed the blindfold. In front of the administrator was a long workbench with assorted tools of torture. We can stop this at any time, David told the administrator. David reached and picked up a butane torch. Clicked the trigger until it fired to life. He then picked up a long screwdriver and began to heat the end of it. The hotter the tip got, the wider the administrator's eyes got, but he still remained silent. The senator could hear everything that was happening, and he knew the sound of a butane torch. David looked at the administrator. Last chance. Still no reply. David bent down in front of the administrator and opened the ice chest. Inside were large pieces of ice. David picked up one of these. With his head tied, the administrator could not see what David was doing, and his mind was running wild. David touched the tip of the screwdriver to the administrator's pubic hairs. The hair sizzled, and David watched as the smoke rose. Just as the smoke reached the administrator's nose, David jammed the piece of ice against the administrator's testicles. The scream the administrator let out was harrowing. David removed the ice and the screwdriver. When he stopped screaming, the administrator confessed to everything. The senator started confessing as soon as he heard the screaming. When they finished recording the confessions, David untied the administrator's head. He wanted to look down, but was afraid of what he would find. Finally he looked. A shocked look came over his face. There was no damage, except for a few burnt hairs. Then he saw the ice laying on the floor slowly melting. Then he started to cry. Don walked up to David. I have never seen that technique before. Your mind is the worst enemy you have, David told Don. Because of the state of fear in his mind, he couldn't tell the difference between cold or hot. His nose told him something was burning, so his mind believed it. You're pretty cold-blooded. Glad I'm on your side, Don said. The best part is when they realize how they were beaten, David replied. As they walked back upstairs, David wondered if any of the other men had heard the screams. As they entered the room, it became apparent they had. One man had thrown up, 3 had fainted, and the others had urinated on themselves. Well, I think we're done here. Take them back and dump them behind their hotel. What about the administrator? He's naked. At this point, I don't think he really cares. Oh, by the way, here's the balance of your pay, David said as he handed Don a briefcase containing the rest of his money. David put all of the gear in the pickup, cleaned the rooms he had used, and headed for Galveston. At a truck stop in New Mexico, he dumped his cargo into a dumpster. When he got home, David made copies of the confessions and mailed them to all the major news agencies and the FBI. David watched as the news reporters practically ate the board of directors and senator alive. All the men were indicted and charged. When this happened, the lawsuits from patients began pouring in. When all the men were found guilty and sent to prison, the corporation that owned the hospital had to declare bankruptcy. A bankruptcy judge was brought in to distribute the holdings. The judge had no option but to declare the hospital be sold. No profitable company wanted to buy the hospital because of the stigmata attached to it. They looked at the hospital as if it were a disease that would infect their other businesses. This was what David had been waiting for. He had Jacob put in a bid for $1 million. Since there were no other bids, David's fake corporation became the new owner of the hospital, lock, stock, and barrel. Chapter 28. Stephen Rogers answered his door one morning. To his surprise, David was standing on his front porch. Stephen remembered David from when he told him about his encounter with the hospital. "What can I do for you, Mr. I'm sorry, I forgot your name." "It's David Johnson, Mr. Rogers, and I have a proposition for you if you have a few minutes." Stephen invited David in, and when they were seated, David asked, "How is your health these days?" "The cancer is gone, and I finally got over the radiation poisoning." "I'm sure you heard what happened to the hospital." "Yes, I followed it closely. Can't say I shed a tear for any of them." "Okay, let me get to the point. I'm here to offer you a job." "Okay," Stephen said in a questioning tone. "I want you to be the new hospital administrator." Stephen laughed. "Yeah, right." "No, I'm serious." "And how do you plan on accomplishing this?" "Well, for starters, you're looking at the new owner of the hospital," David replied. "I don't believe you." "Here's the paperwork," David said as he opened his briefcase and handed Stephen some paperwork. Stephen studied the paperwork for a while, then said, "It says here some corporation named White Elephant Investments bought the hospital." "Yep, that's me," David replied. "How did you manage this?" "Let's just say I had a run of good luck." "Why did you choose me?" "Well, you ran an entire school district. I wouldn't think that just one hospital could be any more difficult. And I think you're an honest and fair man." "I don't know how good I would be with your board of directors." "There is no board, just me." "How do you mean?" "Just what I said. I'm it. I am the entire corporation." David could tell Stephen was still skeptical. "Tell you what, tomorrow I'm having meetings with the department heads. Come down and sit in on the meetings and see how I handle things. Then make your decision." "That sounds fair," Stephen said. The next morning, Stephen arrived at the administrator's office. There were at least 10 people in the waiting room. Stephen went up to the secretary and told her who he was. "Yes, Mr. Rogers, you're expected. Go right in." Stephen looked at the other people and then went into the office. David was seated at the desk. He was busy rifling through the desk drawers and appeared to be discarding most of what he found by the look of the full wastebasket beside the desk. David looked up. "Glad you decided to come. Now we can get started." Stephen took a seat. David walked to the door and asked the secretary, "Which one of these gentlemen is first?" "Mr. Gary Daniels, the head of the MRI department, sir." "Okay." He waited until the man entered the office, then purposely left the door open. "Have a seat, Mr. Daniels. What's on your mind?" "Well, sir, the MRI department is in dire need of a new MRI machine." "Really? Is our old one broken?" "No, but this new model offers an 8% increase in resolution," Gary said as he laid some sales brochures of the new model onto David's desk. David looked at Gary. "How old is our current one?" "It's a little over a year old, sir." "And how much does this new model cost?" $2.5 million. "How much did we pay for the one we have now?" $1.7 million. David rose from his chair. "Mr. Daniels, you're fired. Be out of the hospital by noon." Gary looked totally flabbergasted. "What do you mean? You can't fire me. It has to be approved by the board of directors. And why are you firing me?" "First, unless you've been living under a rock, you would know the board is in jail. Second, I am the new board. Third, to even mention a deal this bad, you are either incredibly stupid or you are in on this scam and getting a kickback from the company that makes these machines. Either way, you're out of here." David concluded by pointing to the open door. Gary gathered his paperwork and left. David motioned for Stephen to follow him. The two men walked to the door. The waiting room was deserted. "What happened to everyone?" David asked his secretary. "Well, they kind of fled, sir," she answered cautiously. David smiled and chuckled. She smiled back. David and Stephen went back in and sat down. "You see, Stephen, I didn't buy this hospital to make a profit. I bought it so people could get the care they needed without getting shafted. Some of the bad doctors got caught, but not all. If you catch any having unnecessary tests done, fire them on the spot. The same goes if they are prescribing unnecessary prescriptions, because they are getting a kickback from the drug companies. You might go through a few doctors at first, but I believe there are some good ones out there. One other thing while we're on the subject of doctors. When hiring new ones, I insist they speak good, clear English." "I'm with you on that," Stephen said. "As long as you make enough profit to pay the bills, maintain the building, and buy new equipment when needed, I'll be happy." "I think I can do that," Stephen said. "Good deal. Figure out how much capital you will need to get going, and I will have it wired to the account. Here's my card with my personal number and my banker's number. Sometimes you won't be able to contact me. Just use your own judgment. I think when people find out how we do business, you will have more customers than you can handle." "Did you say customers?" "Yes, I did. That's how I want our patients treated. They are paying for a service. You of all people should be able to relate to that. There's one more thing I want to attend to personally." David and Stephen walked out to the heliport. The Life Flight helicopter was there with the crew. David walked up. "Who's the head honcho?" One of the men raised his hand and offered it to David. David ignored the man's invitation. "Let me make this short and sweet. I'm the new owner of the hospital. From today forward, the hospital will no longer be responsible for your bills. If you bring someone here, you will have to collect your own money." "What do you mean?" the man asked, his hand still extended. David looked the man in the eyes. "I thought you had to understand English to get a pilot's license in this country. I think that you charge an exorbitant amount for your services, and I will no longer be a part of it." "These helicopters cost a lot of money," the man countered. "As a matter of fact, they do. I have priced them and done the math. At your prices, I could buy a new one every 2 years. In fact, I just might do that." "Now wait a minute," the man said nervously. "Look, either lower your prices to something people can afford, or I will buy my own chopper, and you can go scam people somewhere else. I hear tourists pay $20 to see the Grand Canyon." With that, David turned and walked away, leaving the flight crew standing there. "Keep an eye on them. If they don't lower their prices, call me, and I'll get us a chopper," David told Stephen. After they had lunch, David and Stephen went back to David's office. "I guess this will be your office now. Let me show you the most important thing in the room." David walked over to one of the pictures that were hanging on the wall. He lifted the picture off the wall to reveal a small alcove with a small video camera concealed in it. Under the lip of the desk is the remote for this camera. You can turn it on or off without anyone knowing. "Is all that really necessary?" Stephen asked. "Did you see the clips they showed on TV of the confessions?" "Yes." "Do you think for 1 minute that anyone would have been convicted without them?" "Well, I guess not." Stephen walked over and inspected the camera, then looked under the desk at the remote. David replaced the picture and then continued cleaning out the drawers. Shortly, David's intercom buzzed. "Yes?" "The director of the Arizona Medical Board is here to see you," his secretary informed him. "Send him in." The director came in and introduced himself as Jeffrey Winster. David shook his hand and introduced Stephen, but failed to introduce himself. "This is our new hospital administrator, Stephen Rogers." "Please take a seat, Director. David said, motioning to a chair in front of the desk. "What can I do for you?" "I came by for 2 reasons. First, we heard some rumors that you are planning to lower your prices substantially." "Yes, that's correct." "We would like for you to reconsider that." "And why is that, Director Winster?" "Well, for one thing, you will be hurting the profit margins of the other hospitals in the state." "I fail to see why that would concern you." "That brings us to the second reason I stopped by today. If you cut into the profit margins of the other hospitals, that affects my cut of the profits." "Your cut?" "Yes. The other reason I'm here is to negotiate my cut of your profits." "Wait a minute," David exclaimed. "When did we go back in time to the 1920s when the Mafia was running the country?" "The Mafia has nothing to do with it. You see, we have a lot of retirees in Arizona, and they spend a tremendous amount of money on health care. In fact, they usually spend all the money that they saved over the years. This makes the health care business very lucrative in this state. So if you want in on that cash cow, you have to pay us a cut of your profits." "And if I refuse?" David asked. "Then my team of examiners will come in and inspect your hospital, and I can guarantee you that they will find enough violations to close your doors." "And what is your cut?" 10% off the top." "I see. I will have to consult with my board of directors." "You have 2 weeks," and with that the director left. Stephen could not believe what he was hearing. "What are we going to do?" David just shook his head and said, "It's amazing how dumb people are. Some of them never learn." David walked over and retrieved the video camera and laid it on his desk. He then reached into one of the drawers and retrieved his personal laptop. David plugged the camera into the laptop and sent a video of the entire meeting to every major news agency. Stephen watched with interest, and then he had a realization. "You're the one who got the others to confess." David just looked at Stephen and smiled. The next day, the reporters jumped on the story and the director like a pack of wild dogs. The director fled the country before any charges could be brought against him. The federal government came in and took over his office until all the corruption could be cleaned up.